Sure, pleasure. And my name is Antonio Alvarez. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer at Crypto.com. Been in the financial services industry for much longer than I care to admit. And we joined Crypto.com a couple of years ago in order to enable the growth in this new incredible space, which is crypto. Crypto.com offers a wide range of services, including crypto, as well as some non-crypto services as well, financial services, operating in over 90 countries now, and enjoying really enjoying the adventure and the ride. It's been incredible.
Awesome. Tazek.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much to the Chainalysis team for having us here. It's a short flight from KL, but nonetheless, we appreciate the invite. So, my name is Fadzli. I'm the CEO of IMEX Global. We are one of the 4 and the most recent licensed digital asset exchange in Malaysia. In a previous life, I was a venture capitalist and invested in a bunch of tech companies in the region. And just prior to IMEX Global, I was the Chief Strategy Officer of the Malaysian government agency overlooking all of digital economy development, which is exactly why I saw a huge opportunity in the way that crypto was growing in Malaysia, both in the structured kind of, I would say more conservative approach of the regulator, but the fact that really in our industry, there's so much innovation happening and a few names have kind of gone global that we really thought we needed to get the exchange piece right in order to catalyze the rest of the industry.
So I really want to pick up on that. So if you think about it, most people's experience of crypto the first time is through an exchange. And you know, when I think back to getting into crypto 10 years ago, the exchange experience was awful. You know, when you think about how that's evolved, I would love to just think about what does a modern exchange look like compared to sort of when you maybe first got into crypto. Dato, why don't you?
The way we tend to think about it is that, I think the best estimates are like something between 200 to 250 million people have ever kind of engaged in crypto. And, there's probably a case to be made that the natural early adopter demographic are kind of technologists, guys who are familiar with tech. So as you said, maybe the experience wasn't so user-friendly, but you probably are tech-savvy enough to kind of work your way through. But how do you get from the 250 million to the first billion, right? More than likely, these new users are going to be less tech-savvy. So the systems have to become more and more elegant, more and more user-friendly. And so we're trying to balance the two because regulators have to look backwards to see what has and hasn't worked in exchanges. And then would set, I wouldn't want to say precedents, but they have a best guess estimate that a certain experience is feasible, but at the same time you have to cater for a new demographic of users where you want to obviously protect the clients or the users, but you want to make the process as seamless as possible. Right now in IMEX Global, I'm not proud to say that we have the longest KYC process, but that is like part of the teething pains that we have to go through right now. And as we go through this process, I think we'll feed back to the regulator more and more so that they can be assured that with a lesser granularity of some KYC, but supplemented by something like maybe KYT, then we can achieve a balance where it is feasible for users, but at the same time very safe and secure.
Yeah, and I know that Antonio is going to compete on the longest KYC process, so we'll give it. But how have you seen sort of the change from sort of the early? You've been in crypto a while, so like, have you seen sort of the compliance world shift in your time in dealing with crypto exchanges?
It's been very interesting. I think what's helped really over the last few years has been the influx of people like me, people from traditional compliance organizations within the traditional finance organization entering and having the courage to go into something new, something they didn't understand. Because at the end of the day, fear comes from unknown. And becoming more familiar, understanding a little more that crypto is really not that different. It's just a different way of doing the same thing. And looking at, from a compliance perspective, looking at how the regulations and the best practices apply in this new environment, right? Using new tools because it's a new technology. So using KYT, for example, how do you integrate that into your compliance controls and your compliance organization? But at the end of the day, it's about familiarity, not just from compliance, but the users. To Dato's point, it's people being familiar on how to use crypto. What is crypto? And what I see, to your original question, when I see the biggest change in the exchanges from when I started to now, is the amount of services and the variety of services that are able to provide within one platform that are more familiar to the user, that are less scary, that are more inviting. And that motivates them to go through the KYC process and to go through, and as long as the activity is normal and is suspected and is benign, then it's very smooth. And it becomes a real competitor and a competitor and a value add to the traditional financial services.
Yeah, and I think on that, I mean, we see sort of the exchange as that first moment that someone takes, a local currency and swaps it into a cryptocurrency, and then, now there's been sort of lots of new applications on top of cryptocurrency where you can, stake it or game with it or buy an NFT or send it to a friend. But fundamentally that comes back to the idea of actually holding a digital asset. And, that, again, going back to sort of the consumer journey, that can be a completely new thing for a consumer. So, how has the sort of custody experience, so both of you offer custody to customers, maybe explain to people, like, how does that process work? How do you make that experience user-friendly? Antonio, why don't you?
So it's about availability to it, right? It's about the comfort that, one, you can see it, you can access the app, you can see your balance, you can see what it is, you can see how you're using it, and the comfort of providing the security that is safe. Like, for example, we offer insurance against all of our deposits, all of our custody deposits, up to amounts that are way beyond any retail user would ever hold. And it's providing that comfort, that security around your money, that they can see it and they can feel it, that it's there and it's safe, because it is.
Yeah, and Dr. maybe, if you could add to that.
So, we're a fairly focused business. We're focused on one regulation, right? And really our thesis is that if we get the regulations right, then it will expedite a lot of other kind of parts of adoption. So in our market, Malaysia, the traditional finance space has what's called PIDM, which is essentially the government guaranteeing a certain portion of your deposits. So we don't have exactly that in the crypto space in Malaysia currently, but we're also partnered with Binance, right? So they have the SAFU funds. And so what we're trying to work right now with the regulators is, because we've learned that what the customers want to know is not to say that when I buy a Bitcoin or when I deposit ringgit that those are mine necessarily, but that they are safe, right? They kind of take it as a given that if you're licensed, of course they're mine, and then they should be placed somewhere that's safe. But in an unwanted event that something goes south, then they want to know that at least a portion. But of course, for customers, they want everything to be to be insured. So we're looking at that balance. But I think one of the important things to note is that, at least in our regulated space, we can't actually gain operational access to users' deposits, whether it's fiat or crypto. So there's no issue that something like MX Global could do leveraging or kind of like staking of our users' deposits. So all of that remains in the third-party trust, so we have to use third-party providers to provide those custody services.
And I think that's sort of an interesting thing here within the cryptocurrency space, is that you've got sort of the ability for different businesses to come together to then offer new products and services to consumers where, again, sort of the basic services of being able to, come in and out of cryptocurrencies or store cryptocurrencies for the long term are sort of the basic building blocks. But then there is, again, sort of all this new protocols. You've got the ability to govern, wireless mesh networks, and you've got, these full decentralized virtual worlds where you can own property, and you've got, DAOs that are buying artwork and music rights. How do we strike a balance here? Because exchanges at the end of the day are the place where a lot of those use cases still come back to your businesses and say, hey, in order to get liquidity into these ecosystems, we need to be able to list on your exchange, we need to be able to access your customer base. How do you explain that to the regulator, and how do we get the right balance between sort of all of this new innovation happening and the regulatory oversight that the regulator wants to have? Antonio, you were talking about the proliferation of products. Like, how are you communicating that to your regulators?
So it's all about education. It's all about understanding what is the product and what is that, how's it going to be used, and how's it going to be controlled, right? What are the controls that are around it to ensure that it's used for good, right, and not for bad. Most of us know fraudsters and criminals tend to be the first adopters. Right. So how do you ensure that you prevent those first adopters and allow it to go into a mass distribution? Because it's the mass that gives you the ability to pinpoint and to profile the criminal that is using them. It is, but it is very confusing. Especially when you start talking about mashes and DAOs and virtual swords in a game, it can be daunting for the regulators. On all three facets of the regulators, because I always like to think about the regulator in terms of the legislator, the regulator, and the law enforcement, all with different perspectives, all with different angles that need to be. That needs to be the products need to be presented in a different way for them to understand them and accept them, and see how they're going to, at the end of the day, benefit their constituent base, benefit their economies, and benefit the population itself.
Yeah, and I think we definitely see that in our business where, from a law enforcement standpoint, that virtual sword in a game may be the thing that actually unravels a whole case, and they need to be sort of understanding that. And as you go sort of up the regulatory stack and you go to the regulator, seeing the regulator get to grips with sort of what are the major traded volumes and what are the major markets that people are adopting in. And so, data, like where we see sort of the major adoption on the platform, like how is that being regulated today in Malaysia? Like, are you seeing, maybe talk a little bit about like what are your customers actually using the platform for, and how is the regulator thinking about that?
So right now, we received the license in July 2021, so that's very recent, right? And that's only 3 other operators in Malaysia, or 3 other VASPs in Malaysia that have been operating for just under 3 years. And the short answer to your question is very easy. Our customers only buy Bitcoin and Ethereum because that's all we allow them. That's actually all we provide right now. But underpinning that is like, why only Bitcoin and Ethereum, or why only right now 7 whitelisted coins allowed in Malaysia? So it's a fairly extensive and somewhat exhausting process that we have to go through to kind of justify to regulator, right? And I think there is a fair point to be made that like a submission that we do and advocate to the regulator today may or may not have been true 6 months ago, and there is no guarantee that it will be true 6 months from now. So looking at this, we knew that in the industry, all users naturally want the ability to, or the option to do everything that they want. They want to be able to buy spot, they want to be able to buy futures, they want to buy derivatives, they want to buy or go stake, maybe launch pads. We know that to be true, but it's not services that we immediately provide. That's why in our partnership with something like Binance, what we were looking for in a key partner was, we wanted a partner that first of all, the Malaysian regulations regulates us as a service provider, does not regulate citizens to be able to engage in whichever services they want. So technically speaking, as a Malaysian, you can go out there and be a customer of any unregulated exchange. So naturally, Binance being one of the world's largest, I can't share the number, but I can share you unequivocally, there are more Malaysians on something like Binance than there are on the cumulative regulated exchanges. So we know what Malaysians naturally already do. So even though there might be 100 different options, there's 3 top things that they do on these exchanges. And so our approach to this is to kind of look at those products and figure out how can we localize it to comply to the local laws, and at the same time build in kind of processes and compliance in place to make sure that they are safe for the next 100 users and next 1,000 users after that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, is that like those more simple products actually have compliance processes that are now fairly mature in some way, right? The industry's been around, the spot market has been here really since 2010, and so one of the things that we are seeing is that there are cryptocurrency compliance professionals now. That wasn't the case when we started Chainalysis. There were no cryptocurrency compliance professionals. You being obviously you being one of them, how do you think about team building? How do you think about either bringing in people from traditional finance, or how do you think about retaining and training your staff, Antonio?
Yeah, it's funny because when I started in compliance many moons ago, it was just another department in the company, right? And now there's actually universities that you can get a compliance degree on, which blows my mind. And now I'm sure we're going to have crypto compliance coming up as well. And for me, it's about engaging. It's about getting people that understands compliance, because at the end of the day, like I said, from a crypto perspective, regulatory compliance is probably 70% the same, 30% new.
Right.
And it's recognizing that 70% and finding the people that are hungry to learn the 30. They're hungry and they're understanding, they have the flexibility and the risk appetite to take on something they don't know, which is incredibly hard when you are trying to recruit for compliance officers, because we don't tend to be very risk prompt, right? We tend to be very risk adverse. So it's hard to get them in, but when you find the right person, it's so encouraging. The more people are familiar with it again, the more people understand what crypto is, the more they read about it. The simple fact that I can tell a friend now that I work at crypto rather than I work at Bitcoin, it's
right.
a big change. It is, and that familiarity is bringing more and more compliance professionals from the financial services into crypto, which is a great thing for the crypto industry.
Yeah, and that's how have you found team building? I mean, you oversee more than just compliance, so yeah, I mean, maybe talk a little bit about your team.
In summary, like with great difficulty, right? I mean, talent is scarce overall in tech, even more so in crypto. And then, I think, I'm sure many of us in the room would agree, like if you've had a friend that's been involved in crypto, in the last few years, they might be wailing it out, so they may not even be looking for a job, right? So it's kind of like, it's a difficult balance to strike.
They're back in the market now.
So I was just going to add to that, right? Like over the last couple of years, crypto has been very appealing, especially to TradFi. And then a lot of guys have left kind of like traditional finance houses and then kind of joined. But what you've seen happen like in the start of this winter, I guess time will tell kind of how appealing it is as an industry to come into, because you're leaving a fairly safe but highly regulated space into a newly regulated space, right? So there are new things that you can do, and as Antonio said, 30% of regulations maybe are being developed or entirely new. So for some kind of up and coming compliance officers or even guys from TradFi, that's probably a space where they want to make their mark, right? So there's a huge opportunity here.
It's interesting when I speak with my leadership, and that I'm trying to explain to them that criminals don't care if Bitcoin's at 60,000 or 20,000,
right?
Because they're going to be buying and selling. So the crypto doesn't affect compliance as much as it affects any other areas of the business, because the criminals are still operating now more than, and it's easier because they stick out a little more because the rest are more subdued, but they're still there.
And when you think about that, I think that's a really interesting point, is that, obviously compliance is, a constant in any market condition. But do you think about, obviously now is probably a time where you can build some new processes and actually sort of refine things, because, I spoke this morning a bit like you go through these phases of build versus execute, right? Where, when the market is tearing and you've got, hundreds of thousands of people knocking on your door every day, it's a little harder to build the types of processes that you want to build for the long term. So yeah, maybe, have there been some thoughts about sort of that mentality now?
Yeah, especially because from a compliance perspective, I'm not so worried about the 100,000 people. I'm worried about the 15 people from product that want to launch yesterday, that new initiative or that new innovation. And yeah, there is a little bit of a let's take a breath, right? Let's use this time to be a little more retrospective and continue to innovate fast and continue to innovate, because the market is moving, the industry is moving. But doing it in a little more conscious manner.
And when you think about this build phase at MX Global, I mean, what are you sort of excited about? What's kind of the next phase of growth that you're thinking about?
The one advantage, or like the clear advantage of working in a newly regulated space and a fairly tight regulated jurisdiction like Malaysia is that you can't do very much. So we spend a lot of our time trying to understand what has happened in other markets, whether regulated or unregulated, and what has worked out quite well, and really kind of advocating that with the regulator, right? So we spend a lot of quality time with the regulator upfront. And then, as you said, like, I think going through this winter, this is the time for us to build. So it's becoming more clear, clearer every day, what kind of products our users really can benefit from, and where I guess that the risk mitigation or the risk profile is once adjusted, is kind of feasible to introduce to the mass market. So we are really looking at ways. I mean, at MX we kind of call our high level strategy SIR, right? Like SER, so safe, easy, and the last part, which is the most important to our users, is to make it real. So they want to have real access to their digital assets. Whether it's to buy an NFT, to make that process all seamless, but more importantly, like, to kind of use it in the real world. And that's a fine balance that we have to strike, because cryptocurrencies or digital assets are not legal tender in Malaysia, but there are ways that we can integrate with existing financial systems in order to make that experience, as real as possible for our users.
Yeah.
If I may add as well, but part of the build, what is very important for us, and it's happening in Malaysia, it's happening around the world, is we need to build on certainty. Or build with a lot of flexibility, because the regulatory landscape is changing day by day. So places like Singapore, which gives us a lot more certainty on the regulation and what is expected and what is not expected, versus other markets where there is no such guidance, and the new guidance may come back next week. So we need to build carefully as well.
And I think that, I want to touch on that. I mean, both of you have had sort of regulatory successes, I would say. Like, both of you have had the ability to operate with clear guidance inside these markets. Can you talk a little bit about like what that feels like when the regulator calls you and says that you can proceed, or we're not going to comment whether you can't proceed?
You say who this?
Antonio, maybe talk a little bit about some of your regulatory successes.
No, it's really good to be able to partner with regulators and to be able to work through issues and work through thoughts and take the different angles to any one question. Being able to get to the finish line on a licensing process is fantastic, right? It actually, but always remembering that you have to celebrate for a little while, but that's when the work starts. Right. That's when really you need to start operationalizing. You need to start really hammering down on everything that you either discussed, agreed, or ascertained that there was a regulation about it. But what I find most engaging is in engaging with the regulators as they're legislating. So the legislative side of the influencing and educating, because that's what trickles down into the regulator. Once you start talking to a regulator, they already have, nowadays in many countries, they have regulators that know crypto.
Right.
And that you can actually have good, productive conversations with them, and that's very encouraging. And the more we can get of that, the better.
Yeah, that also used to not exist. Regulators, crypto regulators who understand what's going on. We now have that. Date, maybe talk a little about your success.
So for MX Global, it was a fairly long affair to try to get the license. Malaysia was regulated in 2018, and then the first set of licenses were given in 2019. We're actually one of the applicants that didn't get the approval, but we appealed the approval evidently it took us about 2 years to go through the entire appeal. So I think for my team, it was really a big sigh of relief the day that we got it. But, and I agree with Antonio, the day after you get it is where the real work starts. So you have to continually engage the regulators, right? So as time goes by, the regulators become more and more aware that, yes, you also have to create a competitive environment so that, you can't just rely on just an insular or the local demographic of users, right? So what we're working really closely with the regulators on right now is like, how do you find that balance? Because Malaysia is one of those regulations where all the trading pairs are to the ringgit fiat, right, to the local currency. There's no crypto-to-crypto trading pairs. So we're working very closely with them to see like how can we realize crypto-to-crypto trading pairs with or without stablecoins, because I think stablecoins is another taboo word that regulators do not want to go into for now. But how do you do that and still balance it so that you can attract foreign investor participation, build up enough local liquidity, but at the same time ensure that the entire system is safe and compliant, right? So we spend a lot of time with regulators. So and they're kind of, as much as we find it hard to find talent, I'm pretty sure it's even harder for a regulator, right? And probably if you're entering crypto, which one do you really want to join? Maybe a DGen group, and then maybe a regulated exchange. Like a regulator is probably very low on your list. So we kind of have to support them in that sense because they're typically stretched very thin, and we had to kind of get to the point with them very, very quickly, but at the same time take into consideration more than our point of view.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. It's really great to see sort of, exchanges that are able to, operate in a regulated environment with, processes and people that actually are pushing the industry forward and helping with the education. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thank you for the opportunity.